My only intention was to protect my rights and maintain fairness. I believed it was entirely reasonable to ask for a rental fee and a signed agreement for anyone wanting to use my land. But the Homeowners Association, well, they had very different plans. Let me take you from the beginning. This entire experience turned into a storm of strong personalities, legal challenges, and ultimately, a lesson in what it means to own private property in a close-knit mountain community. I moved into my ranch house about 10 years ago, fulfilling a lifelong dream. The open land, the cool mountain air, and the stillness that came with it were a sharp contrast to the chaos I'd left behind in the city. The property ended up being much larger than I originally intended to buy. But the elderly gentleman who owned the land made me an offer I couldn't say no to. That's how I came to own hundreds of acres, rolling hills, tall evergreens, and a peaceful creek trickling down from higher up. At first, I had grand ideas. Maybe I'd build stables or set up a retreat center. But reality stepped in. Work kept me busy, and the money never stretched far enough. Thankfully, I was able to work remotely, and living in my mountain paradise felt like I'd won life's lottery. I was aware that there were a few homes scattered in the area, but they were distant. My property had always been treated as a separate parcel, so I had no idea that an official homeowners association operated nearby. My ranch existed long before any developments or planned communities were even imagined. For the first few years, I barely heard from the HOA. Occasionally, a friendly invite to a block party, or a neighbor asking to take a scenic walk on my land. I was open to it, casual visits, so long as I was notified. I even enjoyed showing off the views, watching sunsets with visitors, and handing out produce from my greenhouse. Life was peaceful. Then, a new wave of homeowners moved in, bringing with them a new HOA board full of energy and ambition, and a sense of entitlement I hadn't seen before. It began with polite but persistent letters, asking me to, officially, include my land as part of their recreational facilities. The letters were filled with words like community spirit and shared benefit, like a sugar-coated marketing pitch. I chuckled at first. It felt like someone asking for free access to your backyard just because they liked your garden. I replied respectfully, stating I'd allow small visits by request, but I wasn't interested in turning my property into a public park that I'd have to maintain and insure. For a while, it went quiet. Then came the phone calls. Alan, a board member, contacted me, claiming to represent their new recreation committee. He was smooth-talking, enthusiastic, and painted a glowing picture of how the entire community, and I, would benefit. He suggested creating trails, campsites, and even a garden on my land. Allow others open use of your land, you risk losing control. Liability, vandalism, trash, it would all come back to me. I explained to Alan that while my land might lie near the HOA's boundaries, it was legally independent. I bore the cost of taxes, repairs, and any damages that might happen. If someone got hurt, I'd be responsible. He brushed it off. We'll put up signs and disclaimers, he said. Just sign a simple agreement, leave the rest to us. I refused, politely but firmly. A few weeks later, I received an invite to a community meeting. I decided to go, perhaps out of curiosity, or maybe a sense of duty to clear the air. The meeting was hosted in a neighbor's spacious living room. About a dozen people sat around, including Alan and a few board members. As the discussion moved toward unused land in the area, suddenly all eyes were on me. It was surreal. They brought out posters, sketches of trails, picnic spots, a dog park, all drawn out on my land. I sat and listened. No one asked if I agreed. When they were done, I quietly asked, "So, who's paying for all this? What about insurance? And will there be a rental agreement?" The room froze. Karren, one of the more outspoken residents, snapped, "Why should we pay you? You're not even using that land." My heart pounded. Was she serious? I calmly responded, explaining that even if parts of my property weren't in daily use, they were still mine. I paid taxes, I maintained the fences and trails, and if anyone got injured, I'd face the consequences. I made it clear, if they wanted formal access, we could talk about a fair rental agreement and proper insurance, but I wouldn't give up my rights for free. Some nodded in understanding. Karina and her group? Not so much. I could see the resentment in their eyes. After the meeting, the situation escalated quickly. I began receiving more official-looking letters, this time asserting easement rights, and citing laws that didn't even apply to my land. They claimed the recreational area was in the neighborhood's best interest. Thankfully, a good friend of mine, Denise, a property lawyer, stepped in. She practiced in another state but helped me gather documents to prove beyond a doubt that the HOA had no claim over my land. Despite this, the HOA demanded another meeting. I agreed, but only if they brought a clear proposal, rental terms, insurance coverage, and a contract waiving liability. Instead of cooperating, they replied with a vague threat. We will consider other measures if you remain uncooperative. Those measures revealed themselves a few days later. One morning, I noticed a group gathered at my front gate, 2 uniformed police officers and 5 HOA members, including Alan and Karina. They were pointing, gesturing wildly, clearly trying to make a scene. I had locked the gate after they previously attempted to enter with surveying tools without permission. They called the police on me for blocking access to what they claimed was community land. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I walked outside, calm but alert. One officer introduced himself politely and asked if I knew the people. I nodded and confirmed they were HOA representatives. Then came the expected accusation. Karina shouted, "He's withholding land from the entire neighborhood. We have a right to use it." I kept my voice level. "Officer," I said, "I own this land. Here's my deed, and here are the legal documents proving the HOA has no jurisdiction over it." The officer took the papers, examined them, and asked the HOA if they had anything to counter it. They didn't. The officer turned back to me and asked, "Do you want them to leave?" "Yes," I said. "Unless they have a written contract with me, they are trespassing." Karina exploded. "This is ridiculous. This guy refuses to cooperate." But the law was on my side. They called me stingy for owning my land and choosing not to hand it over like a charity gift. Karina was so furious during the gate confrontation that the HOA board members had to hold her back. The police remained calm but firm. They told the group to leave immediately if I, the legal landowner, didn't permit access. Alan, ever the so-called voice of reason, muttered, "Let's not get arrested over this," and reluctantly led them away. But before leaving, Karina turned back and glared at me, her voice sharp with anger. "You'll regret this." I had hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. In the following weeks, subtle hostilities began to emerge. Flyers started appearing on local bulletin boards and community groups, hinting that someone in the area refused to support the community's vision. They didn't use my name, but everyone knew who they meant. I also noticed more and more unfamiliar faces lingering near my property, likely drawn by gossip about the selfish land baron guarding a hidden mountain gem. When strangers crossed my boundaries, I politely asked them to leave. Some complied. Others gave me the kind of look reserved for villains in neighborhood dramas. Things took a darker turn one morning. I stepped outside to find my fence vandalized. Sloppy spray paint screamed words like greedy and selfish across the wooden boards. It was jarring. While I had security cameras covering my home, they didn't reach deep enough into the outer parts of the land to catch the vandals in action. Still, I suspected the act was more than random mischief. It reeked of HOA influence, or at least one of their devoted followers. I reported it to the local police. They logged the incident and offered no real help. So I quietly installed additional trail cameras throughout my property, hidden, motion-triggered, and placed in less traveled zones. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. Rumors kept swirling. I learned that the Recreation Committee was still trying to push forward. Now they were involving city officials, claiming my property was critical to their community project. The only way such a thing could happen legally would be eminent domain, and even that wouldn't apply to private land for something as optional as a hiking trail. The community began to turn on me. Some neighbors whispered that I was being vindictive. Others said I was too wealthy to keep such a vast area locked away from public enjoyment. It was surreal. After all my hard work to buy and maintain this land, I was being treated like a villain for protecting it. Then one day, Alan showed up at my doorstep, unexpected and unusually subdued. I opened the door with caution, bracing for another argument. Instead, he appeared sheepish. He told me the HOA was under intense pressure from new homeowners who had been promised recreational perks before moving in. According to Alan, the developer had suggested that my ranch would be integrated into the community's future amenities. I was stunned. "Did your developer have any agreement with the previous owner of my land?" I asked. Alan shook his head. "Not that I know of. But they hinted it was likely." So that was it. The new residents were sold a dream, and now the HOA was trying to strong-arm me into delivering on that false promise. Trying to be diplomatic, I offered to talk further if the HOA acknowledged my legal rights and respected the financial responsibilities tied to land usage. Alan seemed open to that. So I drafted a proposal. The following week, I presented a fair lease agreement. I offered access to a section of my land, just enough for a small trail, picnic area, and maybe a dog run. The rent I asked was modest, far below market value, and I even offered a discount for the first year. In return, the HOA would need to carry liability insurance to cover any potential injuries or damages. I thought it was a solid, reasonable compromise. At the next meeting, I unveiled my plan. It felt like I had announced something scandalous. Gasps, eye rolls, and scowls filled the room. Karina sneered. "Who do you think you are, trying to make money off your own neighbors?" Carla, another board member, accused me of being morally bankrupt for charging rent on land that, in their eyes, should be shared by all. I kept my composure. "I didn't ask for this. You all approached me," I reminded them. "Letting hundreds of people onto my property comes with costs. Damage, noise, maintenance, and those costs don't vanish into thin air." The meeting ended in frustration. Alan gave me a sympathetic glance, as if to say I tried, but the rest of the board whispered in anger as they left. Then things escalated again. I began receiving a wave of accusatory letters, blaming me for sabotaging community unity. The HOA even threatened legal action, on fabricated grounds. They contacted the city's zoning board, accusing me of blocking public access to open space. My friend Denise, the lawyer, calmed me. She showed me, again, that their legal claims had no standing. Still, the intimidation tactics wore on me. One afternoon, I took a walk across one of my wooded areas to test my new trail cameras. What I saw made my blood boil: fresh footprints, litter, candy wrappers, soda bottles. Someone had trespassed. And it wasn't subtle anymore. Reviewing the camera footage, I saw Karina and her group, boldly walking through my land with measuring tape and notebooks, as if planning their dream park, on property they didn't own. I printed the photos, packed them into a file, and went straight to the police station. This time, the officer took my report seriously. He confirmed that since I'd previously issued warnings, the repeat offense could result in criminal charges. Fueled by evidence, I called an emergency HOA board meeting. When they arrived, I presented blown-up images of Karina and her crew, boldly surveying my land. Karina tried to deny it, but her bright pink sweatshirt was unmistakable. I made it clear, any future trespass would lead to legal action. I also demanded a formal apology for the vandalism, harassment, and false accusations. Alan tried to mediate, but Karina doubled down. She claimed that my refusal to donate land had inspired them to move forward without me. It was unbelievable. The entitlement in that room was staggering. But justice finally turned in my favor. With multiple camera angles and clear documentation, I filed a formal police report. This time, The officers warned Karina directly: if she stepped foot on my land again, she could be arrested. A city official even visited the HOA to issue a stern warning: continued harassment, or any attempt to undermine my property rights would lead to city intervention. The pressure finally broke them. Karina was forced to resign from the HOA board after public backlash. Even some of her closest allies began to distance themselves. The community gossip shifted, and a sense of embarrassment settled over the neighborhood. But the mess didn't end there. Apparently, the developer who originally sold the homes had marketed my land as part of their future vision, despite having no legal basis to do so. Furious residents began chasing the developer, demanding refunds and threatening lawsuits for false promises. I didn't involve myself in that chaos, but I watched with a certain grim satisfaction as the HOA and developer began blaming each other for the fiasco. Then came the final straw. Karina and a few others had filed a petition to the city, demanding my land be declared public space. It was promptly rejected, but the sheer audacity of the move deeply divided the community. Older, more peaceful residents were appalled by the aggression, and even Karina's last allies began to fall silent. Karina's allies quickly distanced themselves when her petition to seize my land was exposed. Some outright denied signing anything. When confronted, Karina exploded, shouting that it was unjust for one person to own so much beautiful land. Her public meltdown only further cemented her reputation as the agitator-in-chief. Rumors spread that she even tried to organize a sit-in on my property, but the legal notices and threat of criminal charges scared most off. Eventually, Karina left the neighborhood entirely. Word was, she moved to a nearby town. I didn't care where she went, as long as it wasn't here. After her departure, something remarkable happened. Neighbors began quietly apologizing. Bernard, a kind older man who had mostly stayed neutral, showed up at my door one afternoon with a tin of cookies. "I'm sorry about everything," he said, his eyes full of regret. He admitted he'd been swayed by community spirit, and had signed a petition without really understanding the consequences. Another neighbor, Dali, slipped a note into my mailbox. "Thanks for not pressing charges or making this uglier than it already was. I was wrong to criticize you." Her words were simple, but they mattered. It felt good to see that not everyone had been brainwashed by Karina's crusade. As the months rolled on, the HOA shifted its focus under new leadership. Rather than trying to commandeer my ranch, they started investing in actual HOA-owned spaces, a modest community center, a small park, and a renovated playground. It was a much-needed change. And for once, I wasn't the villain. Occasionally, I still received polite requests from neighbors asking to use a portion of my land for a small picnic or event. If it's respectful, with notice and a minor upkeep fee, I usually say yes. Sharing isn't the problem, being bullied is. I remember one offer in particular. Lillian, a neighbor I barely knew, ran a local nature photography business. She approached me after everything had calmed down and asked if she could use a portion of the land for wildlife photography. She offered either a small payment or professional photography services in exchange. She's been one of the best tenants I've ever had, respectful, quiet, and always leaving no trace. That arrangement showed others that negotiating with a landowner can be mutually beneficial, not adversarial. In truth, it wasn't just the legal threats that ended the madness, it was the documentation. The police letter, the city's warning, the trail camera footage, all of it added weight to my position and made it clear I wouldn't be bullied. Some might say Karina's downfall was harsh. She lost her board seat, her social standing, and eventually her home. But considering the trespassing, the vandalism, and her relentless harassment, it's no surprise she faced consequences. Even if no criminal charges were filed, her social reputation took a nosedive. In her final weeks, many neighbors openly challenged her behavior, making it clear her antics had backfired. To top it off, the developer who misled new homeowners by promising access to land they didn't own was quietly sued. A few residents reached out to legal counsel and settled out of court. The developer paid damages to those who were most misled by promises of trails and views that were never theirs to begin with. The developer gambled on me being passive, or generous. They lost that bet. Looking back, I've grown a lot. I'm now more assertive and confident in defending what's mine. I learned far more about property law, easement rights, and HOA limitations than I ever expected to. Not all HOAs are corrupt, I know that now. Some stay within their legal boundaries and build strong communities. But when an HOA tries to convert private land into a public asset, without consent or compensation, someone has to draw the line. And I did. For anyone going through something similar, document everything. Save texts, letters, videos, whatever you can. Evidence is your best defense. Know your rights. Stay calm. Don't lash out. I had moments in private where I nearly lost it, but in public, I stayed composed, and that composure swayed people to my side. Once I proved trespassing with undeniable evidence, their story crumbled. As time passed, my mountain life returned to the peaceful rhythm I'd always wanted. I reinforced fences, added clear signage marking private property, and now require all guests to send an email request outlining their intent, duration, and group size. Sometimes I ask for a small fee, or simple help maintaining a trail as a volunteer day. To my surprise, this respectful system led to conservation opportunities. A small team from a wildlife protection group reached out, asking to study migration patterns on my land. They offered a small monthly stipend in exchange for limited, supervised access to monitor deer, mountain lions, and birds. Their guidelines were strict, quiet, clean, respectful. After consulting with Denise, I signed a formal agreement. Ironically, while the HOA wanted noise and crowds, my ranch became a sanctuary for wildlife and researchers. Months later, I received an invitation from the new HOA president, Milo. We met at a local cafe. He was gentle, calm, and to my surprise, he offered a genuine apology. He said the previous leadership had treated me unfairly and let personal motives cloud legal judgment. He added that if I ever chose to cooperate with the HOA in the future, under fair terms and mutual respect, he'd make sure it was done the right way. I told him I was open to discussion, but not obligated. We parted ways on respectful terms. And that, finally, marked the end of the saga. The standoff that started with me being labeled as greedy or selfish ended with a few strong friendships, the troublemakers gone, and the developer held accountable for their misleading promises. If this story teaches anything, it's that property rights matter. Respect matters. And community doesn't mean surrendering your autonomy. Today, I wake up to the serenity of mountain air, flourishing orchards, and vegetables thriving in my greenhouse. I've even begun turning one of the outbuildings into an art studio, something I dreamed of doing for years. Occasionally, someone will email asking to rent a campsite or host a small outdoor event. If they're polite, I consider it. If they act entitled, I decline without guilt. The best thing this whole ordeal taught me is how to negotiate from a place of strength. Respect goes a long way. So does saying no when it's necessary. To anyone dealing with a similar battle, stand firm. Know your rights. Don't fold under pressure, and don't let public opinion turn you into a villain for simply protecting what's yours. In the end, the truth will outlast the noise.